brought to you by BoardGameAtlas.com, the fastest growing board game community in the world. Kia ora koutou and welcome to my top 10 most impactful games of the 2010s. What makes a game impactful? Well, a whole bunch of things, and each of these games has been selected for a different reason. Whether that's a personal impact on me and my life, or an impact on the gaming industry as a whole. These are games that when I look back at the decade, I think, yeah, these games made a real impact. They changed board gaming for me and for many others. This list is going to be presented in chronological order, not in hierarchical order. And as always, this list is entirely my opinion. And with only 10 games to include, there are many, many games I will miss out. And this isn't a list of best games. Some of my favorite games I haven't included on the list. Things like Terraforming Mars. For as much as I enjoy that game, I don't think it's had a profound impact on the industry. So anyway, here we go with the list. And we're going to start off a little by cheating and picking a game from 2009. And that's because I don't think this game's influence was immediate. And that game is The Resistance. For me, The Resistance put party games back on the map. But it was the element of social deduction that really made The Resistance stand out to me. And that, I think, was its profound influence on the rest of the decade. And that social deduction element can be seen in games like Secret Hitler, Coup, Deception, Murder in Hong Kong, and several others. But there's also non-deduction party games that I feel owe a bit to The Resistance, in terms of mainstreaming the idea of having games for 6 to 10 players or more. That includes things like Codenames and Blood on the Clock Tower. In many ways, the 2010s were the decade of the party game, and I think The Resistance kicked that off. Number 9 is a game I have well-documented issues with, and that is Mage Night, the board game. Now, I respect Mage Night. I can play Mage Night. I'm actually quite good at Mage Night. I just find it a bit boring and thematically disconnected, but I totally and utterly understand why this is a massive hit. But what Mage Night did was legitimize solo gaming. Mage Night is at its best as a solo game, and it's one that's really challenging, and it hooked a lot of people into solo gaming. And for most of the decade, it was the #1 ranked solo game by the Solo Gaming Guild on Board Game Geek. And I'd actually say there might not even be a solo gaming guild on Board Game Geek without Mage Night the board game. Throughout this decade, solo gaming has got more and more important. There's been more solo modes created for games. Some of them are really good, some of them are not so good and feel tacked on. But people are thinking about solo gaming. And I can't help but think that's in large part due to the influence of the Mage Night board game. The third game's a game I've actually not played, but I have played some of its successors, and that is Risk Legacy. When Risk Legacy came out, people actually thought it was a bit of a joke, a bit of a novelty idea, that the board changed and you could write your name on different cities and continents. But then people played the game, and Risk Legacy developed a serious following. So much so that the idea was then incorporated into Pandemic Legacy, which became one of the decade's defining games. I thought about including Pandemic Legacy here, but Pandemic Legacy wouldn't exist without Risk Legacy. And what's the impact of that been? Legacy games are now a thing. It's no longer a totally alien idea to rip up a card, to write on the board, to permanently change part of the game you're playing. And Legacy has spread to so many different game systems now. Betrayal at House on the Hill, Aeon's End, and even standalone Legacy games like Charterstone and the much maligned Seafall. So what started off as a bit of a joke in board gaming ended up being something really significant in the 2010s, and I can see Legacy games continuing on into the 2020s. The next game on the list is here because it changed how we consume board games, and that's Zombicide. Zombicide was one of the first big hits on Kickstarter, and went on to create a legacy of other big hit Kickstarter games, including the reboots of Zombicide, Zombicide Black Plague, Rising Sun, and Blood Rage. These games are marketed with lots of components, lots of pieces, lots of miniatures, and lots of stretch goals. A lot of fear of missing out marketing that has filtered all the way through Kickstarter. Now people turn up to a Kickstarter and if it doesn't have a dozen stretch goals, they feel like they're being ripped off. For good or ill, Zombicide and its commercial success on Kickstarter redefined how board games are made and marketed. And that's not just limited to CMON titles. It includes things like Lords of Hellas or Kingdom Death Monster. These big, miniature-heavy, content-heavy boxes of games that people buy and buy and buy every year. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll leave that up to you. There's been some great board games made using that. A lot of people like Blood Rage and Rising Sun. I personally really like Nemesis. But there's also a feeling of bloat, of excess, of needing to get in on the ground floor or else you miss out on all the exclusives. and that drives some pretty negative behaviour. So like it or not, for good or ill, Zombicide might be the most impactful game of the decade, and the game that most defined the 2010s. Next up's a change of pace, and it's Lords of Waterdeep. And the reason I'm including Lords of Waterdeep is when you go back to the 2000s and even the late 90s, there were some very firmly entrenched camps around Eurogaming and Ameritrash gaming. And if you're not familiar with those terms, a Eurogame is things like Caelus or Agricola or Power Grid. Low luck, not a lot of direct competition, and a lot of wooden cubes you move around. Whereas Ameritrash games are things with lots of figures and dice and thematic rules like Axis and Allies, Twilight Imperium 3, and Xia, Legends of a Drift System. What Lords of Waterdeep did was take a traditionally Ameritrash setting and theme and marry that up with a Euro game. Because Lords of Waterdeep, despite its D&D theme, is a cube pusher. You place workers, you get cubes, you spend them to do things. It's a point salad game about collecting little cubes, but the D&D theme allowed so many people to see past that, pick up the game and go, oh, this is D&D, this looks like fun. And it opened the door to so many people to try Euro games who might not have before. And for Eurogamers, it was an opportunity to play something that wasn't just agriculture or industry games. Lords of Waterdeep was a staggering success as well. I've no idea how many copies they sold, but it was a bunch. And for me, that idea of merging Euro and Ameritrash is one of the consistent themes across the 2010s. Those divisions aren't as strong as they used to be. There's a lot of what we call hybrid games, and that brings me to Scythe, the next game on my list. Conceptually, Scythe took the ideas from Lords of Waterdeep of merging Euro and Ameritrash concepts and really produced a complete Euro-Ameritrash hybrid. It's a cube pusher. It's got resource management and optimization, but it's got mechs and upgrades and special rules and encounters, as well as stunningly high production quality. Scythe, in a way, is a decade-defining game because it marries up those two concepts so well. And it was financially a massive hit. It put Stonemaier Games and Jamie Stegmaier on the map, and they've continued to make an impact with games like Wingspan. But if you were to think of one game that defined the 2010s, for me that would be Scythe. It was a Kickstarter game. It had lots of content, fantastic production values, and it took lessons from both Eurogaming and Ameritrash gaming and blended them together to create a new form. And as we continue this evolutionary story of merging Eurogames and Ameritrash games into a new form, we come to arguably the most successful game of the decade, and that's Gloom Haven. Gloom Haven took a traditional Ameritrash format, the dungeon crawler, and added in Euro-style card management and optimization and resource management into the game. And then via Kickstarter, it added oodles and oodles of content, creating this massive box full of so much to do and so much to play. Gloom Haven is a staggering success. For a game of its price and box size, it has sold a disturbing amount of copies. Look, I'm not going to go and talk about Gloom Haven too much because a lot's already been said about the game, by me and by many others. But looking back at it, it's a staggering achievement to design all those classes, all those monsters, that massive scenario book, and all the other bits and pieces together, and yet the game still feels tight. Gloom Haven is a game that so many designers out there would be looking at and going, I wish I made that. The next game on the list is This War of Mine, and this is here for two reasons. The first is the obvious one, which is the content and theme within it. For me, This War of Mine was the moment that board gaming really matured as an art form. It proved that it could be a game where you could tackle really serious subject matter and really complex issues within the frame of a board game. Now, some other games had done this before, but none had quite executed as well or as in-depth as This War of Mine. And for me, this is the Schindler's List of board games. One of those pieces of art you don't engage with to enjoy or to laugh, but you engage with it to feel something, and to feel something significant. This War of Mine represents a maturing of board gaming as a hobby, where we are not just rolling dice and moving our top hat around the board anymore. We're actually engaging with topics that make you think and feel. And the other impact of This War of Mine is it put Awakened Realms on the map, a publisher who's taken Kickstarter by the scruff of the neck in the last 3 years of the decade, and is really pushing how that platform is working now. They've learned a lot from Simon, and they're not just remaking the same game with more content. Each game they're putting out something different. And while that's good, it also really taps into that fear of missing out factor as well. I also think this War of Mine is a great example of the good Kickstarter can do. I'm not sure which publisher would have taken a gamble on a game of this scale with this theme. So for all the problems with Kickstarter, I am kind of thankful for it, just for this game at least. The second to last game will shock no one, and that's Spirit Island. Everyone knows I'm a giant fanboy for this game, and it was number 1 on my top 100 games of all time recently. But it's on here for a very specific reason. And that's not because it's got great solo play, that it's an excellent co-op, and it has wildly asymmetric play. Those are all features that make it a great game. Why it's impactful to me is that it took on the colonial tropes that are rife in board gaming and gave them a giant finger. It flipped over the traditional narrative of, you are the great colonizers moving to these islands and taking stuff, and whoever gets the most stuff at the end of the game wins. It flipped that on its head, and it said, what if colonizers were the bad guys? What if the island fought back? And that provoked a lot of discussions. And there are a lot of people who won't play this game because the white people are the bad guys. And that in itself is an interesting point and an impact that this game has made. I say it a fair bit that board games can be an art form. And I think Spirit Island embodies that. The game makes you think about things. Not necessarily directly while playing, but around the context, the themes, and what's explored. The fact that colonizers as bad guys upset people means it provoked a response. It provoked discussions. It provoked thinking about how we treat colonialism in games. How that topic is explored, and why the default is to play as the colonizers. And I'm hoping that impact will trickle through into the next decade, and we'll see a lot more games with different takes on things, and not the same POV over and over again. And the final game is from a genre I don't really care much for, and that's the roll and writes or flip and fills. And that game is Welcome To. In the last couple of years of the decade, roll and writes have blown up. They've become exceptionally popular with games like Welcome To, Ganz Clever, Railroad Inc., and Cartographers. Now this genre has been around for a while, but its massive rise in popularity over the last 3 years I think is largely linked to the popularity of Welcome To. And Ganz Clever as well. I can't really say a huge amount about roll and writes because I don't really enjoy them a huge amount. Something about the limited interaction between players and spending most of the game just staring down at what you're doing in front of you. That's just really not how I enjoy playing games, but the number of titles coming out over the last 3 years, the number of people I've seen at conventions playing them, and the number of games that are getting a roll and write version tells me that roll and writes are one of the faster growing game genres, and one where a lot of innovation is happening. A good friend of mine is actually working on a roll and write game that is mind-blowingly complex, with so many different fields to fill in, and so many different things to do, and I played it and I was like, wow, this is overwhelming, but also kind of amazing. And I think it's a genre that hasn't reached its potential yet, and there's a lot of space here that can be developed and can be built up. And I think when people look back at this decade, they'll look at roll and writes and say this is the decade where they took off. Alright, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed it. And just a reminder that these are my opinions. Feel free to have your own in the comments. Were there any really impactful games that I missed? Almost certainly. If so, let me know. But let me know politely. And if you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to the channel, and support us on Patreon.